Let's first take a look and see how Python works. Note first that we've started to include labels on our print statements. My integer before add1, my integer after add1, and so on. That's going to make our output a little bit easier to read, although it might make our code a little bit busier. So we start by defining the function add1, and then our main code runs. It creates a variable called myInteger and gives it the value 5, and then it prints the value of myInteger preceded by this label. So that's what we see up here. MyInteger before add1 is 5. Notice again that Python automatically added the space between myInteger and the string that labels it. Then we're going to call that function that we wrote. We call add1 with the argument myInteger. That kicks execution up to the function, where the value of myInteger, 5, becomes the value of an integer in the function. So at the start, the value of an integer is 5. Now line 3 runs, and it sets an integer equal to itself plus 1. And sure enough, on line 4, we see that the new value of an integer is 6. Now an integer came from myInteger, right? And so if we passed by reference, we would expect the new value of myInteger to be 6. If we pass by value, we would expect the value of myInteger to still be 5, because this function couldn't actually change the original value of that variable. So which is it? Well, on line 11, after the function has run, we see that sure enough, myInteger still has its original value. So that means when myInteger was passed into this add1 function, its value was passed in. So this function couldn't actually change the real value of myInteger. It could only change the value of its own local copy, the way it wrote it down when it received that input. This is the equivalent of yelling the number 5 to Addison. He can write it down on his own paper and change it however much he wants, but he can't come over and change your original value. Now there's an important note here though. Later we'll find out that that's not actually the way this works. Technically Python is passing by reference, but there's something else going on that makes this a little bit more complicated. For all intents and purposes though, it's exactly as if Python is passing by value. So for now, you can operate under that assumption, at least as far as primitive types like integers are concerned.